Imagine stepping onto a plane with nothing but a battered canvas bag and the hope of a quiet trip, only to realize the cabin has no room for your dignity. A black traveler in simple clothes, calm and polite, becomes the unwilling center of an in-flight spectacle that spirals from cold indifference to open hostility. Every rule seems to change just for him. Every glance says he doesn't belong. But beneath the humiliation lies a truth that could shatter an entire industry and cost it everything it thought was safe. This isn't just a story about one man's shame. It's about the moment the hunted turns the entire system on its head. Stay with us as we unravel each chilling, infuriating, and ultimately revelatory stage of this journey. If you're ready for a story that exposes ugly truths and demands justice, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you think and where you're watching from. Your voice matters in this conversation. Let's dive in. Langston Price tightened his grip on the handle of his old canvas duffel bag as he walked through the terminal, weaving around hurried travelers and squealing kids dragging superhero-themed roller bags behind them. He wore a plain gray t-shirt that had faded from too many washes, jeans worn thin at the knees, and brown boots scuffed from long days on dusty job sites. He'd never cared much for fancy clothes, and today wasn't supposed to be about appearances anyway. This flight wasn't a vacation. It was work, important work, a meeting he'd spent months preparing for, negotiations that could change his company's future forever. He had sacrificed sleep, time with family, even medical appointments to make it all come together. Now, all he had to do was get on this flight and finish the deal in person. He joined the priority boarding line, clutching his paper ticket and checking the sign 3 times to be sure: first class and priority boarding. He felt strangely aware of the stares of the other passengers, a businessman in a sleek navy suit scrolling on his phone, a mother whispering to her husband while jostling her restless toddler. Langston had learned to keep his head high in these spaces, even when it felt like people's eyes bounced off him as if he didn't belong. He practiced the words he'd say at the counter in his head. Good afternoon. Priority boarding. Thank you. That was it. No drama. Just polite, just normal. But as the line inched forward, he watched Agent Marlene at the gate. She was middle-aged with sharp eyes and a smile that was only for some. She chatted warmly with the white couple in front of him, checking their tickets with an easy, familiar laugh. "Welcome aboard, enjoy your flight," she told them, the grin splitting her face wide as they passed through. Langston stepped forward, ticket ready. She didn't look at him. Instead, she turned to the next people behind him, a family with matching roller bags, and said cheerfully, "Next, please." Langston hesitated, startled. He looked around, sure he'd misheard. The family behind him shot him a puzzled glance, but moved past without protest. He tried to keep the confusion off his face as the couple behind them began inching forward too. He raised his voice just enough to be heard. "Excuse me, ma'am. I think I'm next." The gate agent's head jerked up. Her smile vanished so quickly it looked painful. "One moment," she snapped, voice like ice. She turned her back to him entirely and began typing on the computer. Langston's stomach twisted. He could hear the restless noises behind him now. A man sighed heavily. Another cleared his throat, impatient. The mother in line glared at him, as if he were the one causing the hold-up. He felt heat crawl up his neck, embarrassment digging its claws into his spine. After a minute that felt like an hour, Marlene turned back around, squinting at him. "Can I help you?" she said, tone dripping skepticism. He licked his lips, voice steady but tight. "Priority boarding." He held out the ticket carefully. She didn't take it. She just looked at it, then looked him over head to toe, eyes lingering on the scuffed boots and frayed shirt collar. "Are you sure you're in the right group?" she asked, voice loud enough to echo down the line. A man behind him snorted. "Oh, here we go," he muttered. Someone actually laughed. The laugh was sharp and mean and buried itself in Langston's gut like a hook. His throat felt dry. He swallowed hard before speaking again. "Yes," he said slowly, fighting to keep it even. "Priority. First class." He offered the ticket again, refusing to drop his gaze. She snatched it from his fingers, finally, rolling her eyes. She held it up like it smelled bad, inspecting it with exaggerated care. She said. Nothing else. Just that dismissive hum. The silence stretched until it snapped. A voice behind him barked, "Can you move along? Some of us have flights to catch." Another voice chimed in, "Jesus, it's not that hard." His fingers twitched around the handle of his bag. He wanted to turn and scream at them, to throw the ticket in her face and walk out. He wanted to do anything except stand there and take it. But he took it, because he'd learned. Because blowing up would only confirm whatever ugly thoughts were spinning in their heads. Because he wasn't here for them. He was here for that deal. For his future. For the people who depended on him. Finally, Marlene scanned his ticket with an angry beep and tossed it back at him. "Go on," she muttered, dismissing him with a flick of her hand like he was a stray dog. He moved into the plane's narrow aisle and turned left toward first class, trying not to feel the stares of passengers already seated in plush leather seats, drinks in hand, chatting comfortably. But before he could make it even 2 steps, a sharp voice stopped him cold. "Sir? Excuse me. Sir." It was Marlene's voice again, the gate agent who had humiliated him moments before. He turned, dread twisting in his gut. She was hurrying onto the plane behind him, her face pinched with disapproval, her gaze locked onto him like a hawk spotting prey. He felt every muscle in his back tighten. He took a half step back to let a mother and daughter pass him in the aisle, watching as Marlene smiled at them and waved them past without even glancing at their boarding passes. The mother gave Langston a wary side eye as she passed. The little girl clutched her stuffed unicorn tighter. Langston's pulse roared in his ears. He forced himself to speak slowly. "Is there a problem?" he asked, voice low but steady. Marlene didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted her lanyard, drew herself up to her full height, and gestured imperiously at him. "May I see your ID again?" she demanded. He blinked. "You just checked it. I need to confirm it," she said. Her voice was loud enough to carry back through the plane. Heads were turning. He could see the curiosity, the skepticism, the hunger for drama. A man in a golf shirt in row 3 actually leaned into the aisle to get a better look. Langston's face felt like it was on fire. He handed her his ID with stiff fingers. She took it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated, then squinted at it exaggeratedly. Lips pursed, eyes darting from the card to his face and back again. She said. Again that awful dismissive He stood there and waited, humiliation mounting in sickening waves. After what felt like an eternity, she handed it back abruptly, without a word of apology. He forced himself to take it with fingers that trembled just slightly. Before he could move past her, she stepped even closer, blocking his way into the first-class section entirely. She cast a meaningful glance down at his old canvas duffel, stained and frayed from years of use. "And this?" she demanded. "We're going to have to check the size on this." Langston blinked. "It's a carry-on," he said, trying to keep the pleading out of his voice. "It's been carry-on size for every flight I've taken." "Policy," she snapped. "We have to ensure it meets size requirements. Security, you know." She didn't ask the woman with the massive designer tote ahead of him. Didn't ask the man with the overstuffed roller bag whose zipper had nearly popped open in the jet bridge. Only him. Only Langston. His throat felt tight. "Fine," he said. His voice was a rasp. He tried to keep his eyes on the floor as he handed the bag over. Marlene smirked as she took it, then stomped over to the small luggage sizer set just inside the jet bridge. She dropped it on the metal frame with deliberate force. The bag landed with a loud thud, and something inside shifted unpleasantly. Langston winced. She made a show of measuring it, pressing the edges, even pulling on the seams. Then she lifted it a few inches and slammed it again, harder. A ripping sound split the tense silence. The zipper popped halfway open, and underwear tumbled onto the floor, landing in a pathetic heap of cotton and elastic. A gasp rippled from the aisle. Langston's entire face went hot. The humiliation hit like a punch to the gut. He bent quickly to scoop the clothes back into the torn bag, fingers fumbling as Marlene just watched, arms folded, lips pressed together in a thin, satisfied line. He felt the weight of a dozen eyes on him. One passenger snickered. Another muttered, "Jesus, get it together, man." He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. He wanted to tell them all exactly what he thought. But he didn't. Instead, he forced himself to keep his voice level. "It's fine," he croaked. "It's fine. Just give it back." Marlene held onto the bag for another moment, savoring her power, before shoving it back into his hands. "You'll need to check that at the gate," she said smugly. "Clearly doesn't meet the standard." Langston opened his mouth, then shut it. His throat felt raw. He nodded stiffly. She called over another attendant to take the bag away. He watched as the torn canvas with his personal belongings inside was carted off like garbage, his dignity along with it. From the jet bridge, Marlene's sharp voice rang out again, clear and deliberately loud. "Sir? Sir, excuse me, before you get too comfortable." Langston turned in his seat slowly, dread pooling in his gut. He saw Marlene framed in the doorway of the plane, her eyes locked onto his, her expression one of smug authority. Passengers turned to look, craning their necks, curiosity bright in their eyes. He felt pinned in place like an insect under glass. Marlene moved forward with purpose, her voice slicing through the muted conversations and hushed instructions. "We need you to step back out for a moment," she said, her tone falsely polite but ringing with threat. "We have to make sure everyone follows the rules." She said it loudly enough that it felt like a public service announcement. Langston swallowed, his mouth impossibly dry. His fingers dug into the armrests of his seat. He didn't move at first, hoping, praying she might just walk away. But Marlene wouldn't let him off the hook that easily. She shifted her gaze to the other passengers and repeated herself even louder. "We need to make sure everyone follows the rules," she practically sang, drawing out the words. "Security protocols are there for everyone's safety, you know." A ripple of murmurs ran through the cabin. He heard a muffled laugh from somewhere behind him. A woman in pearls whispered something to her husband, who smirked and shrugged. A teenager in business class up front lifted his phone discreetly, camera angled toward Langston, recording the moment for a private group chat or maybe social media. Langston felt the heat crawl up his neck. He fought the urge to curse her out, to throw his ticket in her face and walk off the plane in righteous anger. But he didn't. He couldn't. He thought of the meeting tomorrow, the signatures he needed, the jobs that depended on this deal closing, the families he employed who would have to pack up and move if this fell through. He couldn't afford to lose this. Not over pride. Not over this. He forced himself to stand, his legs stiff, his knees clicking. He tried to smooth his shirt with shaking hands, though the juice stain from earlier had already spread across his abdomen in an ugly, dried arc. Marlene waited with her arms folded, foot tapping, the picture of bureaucratic impatience. She gave him an exaggerated, mocking smile when he finally moved into the aisle. "Thank you," she said in a saccharine voice. "This won't take a moment. Just want to make sure you're where you're supposed to be." Langston clenched his jaw so tightly it ached. He didn't respond. He couldn't trust himself to speak. He felt every eye in the first-class cabin follow him as he shuffled down the aisle, trying to keep his shoulders straight, trying not to flinch at the ugly snickers and knowing glances. He passed a man who snorted dismissively. "Hurry it up, man," the guy muttered, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Some of us have flights to catch." Langston's head jerked involuntarily at the words, and for a split second, he wanted to turn and hit the man right in his smug face. He wanted to drop his professional act, to say exactly what he thought, to scream that they had no idea who he was or what he had sacrificed to sit in that seat. But instead he sucked in a lungful of stale airplane air and kept walking, eyes locked on the ground so they wouldn't see the rage and shame battling in his gaze. He followed Marlene out of the cabin and onto the jet bridge, the quiet punctuated by the metallic clunks of his boots on the floor. As soon as they were out of earshot of the flight crew, Marlene turned on him with a look of mock concern. "We have to re-verify your boarding group," she said primly. "There was a system error. Happens all the time." He knew it was a lie. They both knew it. But he bit his tongue until he tasted copper. He handed her the ticket again with robotic obedience. She scanned it with a flourish, eyes flickering to her handheld screen, pretending to read something that wasn't there. She said once more. That sound, that humiliating, dismissive sound she loved to make. She glanced at him from under her lashes, clearly enjoying herself. Langston swallowed hard, his mouth dry as cotton. He felt exposed, raw, like his skin was gone and every nerve lay uncovered. He tried to refocus on the reason he was here, to remember the contract, the deal he had to close, the entire future he was gambling on this trip. He adjusted his seatbelt, fingers trembling just slightly, and pressed himself back against the headrest, willing the sting in his eyes to fade. He didn't want them to see him cry. He wouldn't give them that. But he didn't get long to gather himself. Not even close. Because as soon as he started to unclench his fists and tried to find a rhythm in his breath, he heard a new voice cut through the hushed cabin. "Excuse me, sir," the voice said, dripping with a different sort of poison. Langston's head jerked up. A new flight attendant stood there, blocking the aisle in front of him. She wore the company's navy blazer, hair twisted into a tight bun, eyes cold as glass. Her name tag read Kelly. He felt his stomach turn. She didn't wait for him to answer. She was already scanning the seat chart on her tablet, tapping it with perfectly manicured nails. Then she looked up at him with a smirk that didn't even try to hide itself. "Oh," she said, drawing the word out like it was a bad taste on her tongue. "You're in first class?" The emphasis she put on "you" felt like a slap. He felt the weight of the cabin pressing in. Conversations died down. Heads tilted. Even the kid with the phone lifted it again, catching the way Kelly's mouth twisted in something like amusement. Langston's lips parted. He almost said something sharp, something biting. But the words died in his throat. Instead, he swallowed and nodded stiffly. "Yes," he said, voice scraping out of him like sandpaper. "I'm in first class." Kelly didn't bother to hide the snort of laughter that bubbled out of her. She actually laughed, eyes rolling as she glanced at the other passengers who were listening in. A few of them smiled. A man 2 rows back let out a soft whistle, shaking his head as if the world had gone insane. Langston's skin burned. He fought the tremor in his jaw. He could feel his heart hammering, his pulse roaring so loud he thought it might deafen him. He forced himself to stay quiet, to stay still. Kelly wasn't done. She turned back to her tablet and sighed dramatically. She said, tapping her screen with deliberate slowness. "That's strange." She paused, let the silence grow. Let the eyes stay on him. "I don't see you listed here." Langston's mouth went dry. He fumbled in his pocket for his boarding pass, holding it out with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't take it right away. She stared at him, letting the moment stretch and warp. Finally, with an exaggerated huff, she snatched it from him and scanned it. The beep confirmed what they both already knew. He belonged there. She didn't react. She just handed it back like it was a used tissue. "Wait here," she said, voice slicing into him like a knife. "I need to confirm with the captain." Langston blinked. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked slightly. He hated that. She turned away without answering, brushing past his knees so roughly he had to twist in his seat to avoid her hip slamming into his face. But the mantra was wearing thin. It was being chipped away every second he spent in this seat. Every second he felt Kelly's condescension radiating through the cabin like poison gas. He heard the hush of whispering from the row behind him. A woman muttered something to her companion. He couldn't catch every word, but making trouble, and doesn't look the part carried clearly enough. He pressed his eyes shut tighter and forced himself not to turn around. He didn't want to see their faces, didn't want to confirm that yes, they were talking about him. But he didn't get the luxury of staying hidden for long, because just as he felt the tension in his shoulders begin to slip by a fraction, Kelly returned. He heard her heels first, the sharp click against the aisle's narrow carpet, and then the rustle of her uniform. He willed her to keep walking past him, to go serve someone else, but of course she didn't. She stopped right at his row and cleared her throat in a deliberately theatrical way. The sound made his stomach knot. He turned his head slowly to look at her, and their eyes locked. Hers were gleaming with something unpleasant. She didn't speak at first. She let the silence grow heavy, knowing every passenger nearby would be watching them. Then she shifted her weight, crossing her arms. "We need to do one more thing," she said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. Langston blinked, confused and already exhausted. "Excuse me." His voice cracked again, the humiliation making it weak. Kelly didn't answer immediately. Instead, she jerked her chin at the bag at his feet, the small gray backpack he'd clung to since they'd forced him to check his duffel back at the gate. "That," she said flatly. "We're going to have to inspect that." He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry as dust. "Why?" She actually smirked, lips curling like she'd been waiting for that question. "Security protocol," she sang, voice as fake-friendly as a TV jingle. "You wouldn't want to hold up the flight if there's anything unexpected in there, would you?" That last word dripped with venom. Langston looked at her, trying to see if there was even a hint of reason behind her eyes. There wasn't. He felt the heat creeping up his neck, the sweat gathering at his temples. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just clenched the bag tighter in his lap. Kelly clicked her tongue. "Sir," she drawled, louder this time, voice rising to make sure everyone heard. "We don't have time for this." She turned and caught the eye of the other attendant, gesturing for her to come over. The younger woman approached reluctantly, glancing at Langston with something like pity, but not enough to stop what was happening. "We need to inspect the bag," Kelly told her sharply. Langston's fingers refused to unclench. He knew there was nothing in it to worry about. He had a charger, his wallet, a small travel folder with printed directions and confirmation codes, and some clean socks and boxers he'd stuffed in at the last minute after losing the duffel. But the thought of them rooting through it in front of everyone made him feel like he was going to be sick. "Please," he tried, voice hoarse. "It's just personal items." Kelly rolled her eyes so hard it looked painful. "Rules are rules," she said with mock cheerfulness. "If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about." Then she reached down herself and tugged at the zipper. He jerked back on reflex, but she slapped his hand away like he was a child. The zipper went with a loud, ugly noise, splitting the top of the bag. She yanked it open and reached in with dramatic slowness. The first thing she pulled out was a pair of neatly folded socks. She held them up between two fingers like they were contaminated. A snicker rippled through the nearest seats. Next, she pulled out a pair of boxers. She dangled them for the cabin to see, her mouth twisted in mock confusion. "Traveling light, huh?" she said, her tone dripping sarcasm. Someone let out an actual laugh this time, a harsh bark that made Langston flinch. He felt his face heat until he was sure it was glowing red. His heart thundered so hard it hurt. His chest felt too tight to expand properly. He could feel it in the weight of their averted gazes, in the side glances that flicked to him and then darted away. He didn't know if they pitted him or despised him for daring to sit there, but either way, they'd seen it, seen him, and he couldn't hide from it. He tried to swallow the sour taste in his mouth, but it wouldn't go away. He glanced out the window, hoping the view of the tarmac would help him pretend he wasn't there at all. But even the sight of the ground crew moving luggage and waving in planes felt like a taunt, a reminder of how little control he had over any of this. His thoughts turned to the meeting waiting for him, the contract he needed to sign, the future of his business and of the families relying on their jobs with him, balanced on whether he could hold himself together. He had to. He couldn't afford to snap. He closed his eyes, praying for a moment of peace. That's when Kelly came back. He heard her before he saw her, the authoritative click of her heels against the narrow aisle making the hair on his arms rise. He didn't want to look at her. He wanted her to pretend he didn't exist. But of course, she wouldn't. She stopped right at his row, hovering over him like a dark cloud, the sneer practically audible in her breathing. "Sir," she said, with a brittle, exaggerated politeness that made the word sound like an insult. He didn't respond at first. Maybe if he stayed still enough, she'd go away. But she didn't. "Sir," she said again, louder. Heads turned. He felt them watching again, the entire cabin's focus tightening on him like a spotlight. He raised his eyes, voice scraping out of him. "Yes. I'm going to need to see your ID again," she said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just to verify you're not using someone else's ticket." Her words dropped like stones into a pond, sending ripples of whispered shock through the nearby seats. He actually heard someone murmur, "Wow," in a disbelieving voice, and another voice respond with a low snicker. Langston felt the floor tilt under him. His mind went blank with horror, shame rushing into his bloodstream like poison. His fingers twitched on the bag in his lap. He licked his lips, tried to speak, couldn't at first. He forced it out. "You already checked it. Twice." His voice sounded pitifully thin in the heavy air. Kelly didn't blink. "Policy," she said flatly. "You know how it is. We have to be careful these days." She actually winked at him as if they were sharing a joke. Langston wanted to vanish. He wanted the earth to open up under his feet and swallow him whole. He could feel the flush creeping up his neck, the humiliating burn in his ears. Slowly, hands shaking, he dug into his wallet and pulled out the ID. He held it out, hoping, praying, that she'd just take it and leave. She didn't take it right away. She made him hold it there for a painfully long beat while she fiddled with her tablet, deliberately ignoring him. Finally, she snatched it out of his hand with a little too much force. She turned it over, inspecting it like it might be fake, twisting it back and forth under the overhead light. She even squinted at his face and back at the picture, lips pursed like she couldn't decide if it was really him. Langston kept his head bowed, eyes on his knees, face burning. The whispering had returned behind him. He couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. He knew what they were saying. He knew what they were thinking. Kelly finally tossed the ID back into his lap without so much as a nod. It bounced off his thigh and landed on the seat next to him. "Fine," she said airily. "Guess you're good." She turned to go. He reached for the ID with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. His chest felt hollowed out, scraped raw. He tried to remember the deal, the meeting, the promise he'd made to himself not to fight. He tried to remember who he was, who he'd fought to become, but all he could feel was small. And then Kelly returned one last time with the drink cart. He told himself to focus on breathing, on the contract he needed to sign tomorrow, on the futures he was fighting for. But every time he found that thin, fragile thread of purpose, Kelly's voice came back, sneering in his memory. "Maybe you'll want to change into something cleaner." The words scraped raw against his brain. He forced his fingers to uncurl from the armrest. His knuckles were white from gripping it so hard, nails leaving half-moon indents in his skin. His breathing was ragged. He wasn't sure how much longer he could sit there without losing control. He felt a sob clawing up his throat, ready to escape, and he swallowed it back down with such force it made his chest ache. That was when Kelly returned again. He hadn't even heard her approach this time. Her shadow fell across him before he realized she was there. He turned his head slowly, dreading what new cruelty she had waiting. She didn't disappoint. She was holding her tablet again, fingers tapping against it like she was biding time before delivering a line she'd rehearsed to perfection. She cleared her throat loudly enough that the nearby passengers paused their conversations to listen. Langston felt the attention land on him all over again. He shrank into his seat instinctively, muscles tensing. "Sir," she said, voice syrupy sweet in the way only venom can be. "We need to have a little talk." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt closed off, like he couldn't draw enough air. She didn't wait for a response. She turned slightly to address the rest of the first-class cabin, her voice rising. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, everyone, but this passenger is refusing to comply with basic flight rules." A small gasp rippled through the cabin. Someone actually tooted disapprovingly. Langston's ears rang. He couldn't believe she was doing this. He felt his tongue like lead in his mouth, unable to form words to defend himself. He wanted to tell them all what really happened, how she'd spilled water on him deliberately, how she'd rifled through his bag, how she'd mocked him and treated him like an animal. But the words wouldn't come. His mouth just opened and closed uselessly. Kelly tilted her head at him, eyebrows raised in performative innocence. "Would you like to explain yourself, sir?" He shook his head once, jerky and defeated. She clucked her tongue in disappointment, turning back to the passengers. "Well then," she said, voice dripping with self-satisfaction, "I guess we'll have to do this the hard way." She turned back to him, smile razor sharp. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the plane." That broke something in him. He blinked up at her, finally finding enough air to choke out a single word. "Why?" It was a whisper, but it was all he could manage. Kelly didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She just turned her head theatrically to the nearby passengers. "For non-compliance," she announced clearly. "He's been disruptive and uncooperative since boarding." That got her exactly what she wanted. A man in a suit 3 rows back actually clapped once, slowly mocking. A woman laughed under her breath and shook her head. Another voice called out, "Finally." Langston felt the world spin around him. He gripped the armrests so hard they creaked. He could feel his pulse thudding in his temples, hear the blood roaring in his ears. He was dizzy with rage, with shame, with disbelief that this was happening, that no one was stopping it, that no one cared. Kelly put a hand on her hip and tapped at her tablet again. "Security will meet you at the door if necessary," she added, voice breezy. "Your choice, sir." Langston couldn't breathe. He felt like the walls of the plane were pressing in, the rows of seats shrinking, the ceiling lowering. He forced himself to inhale, to keep from screaming. He knew that if he raised his voice, if he stood up and so much as pointed a finger, she'd call it a threat. She'd have him hauled off in cuffs. He had no choice. He had to stay. He had to endure it. He nodded once, so small it was barely perceptible. Kelly raised her eyebrows again, smirking. "What was that?" she prompted cruelly. "Speak up so everyone can hear you." He swallowed. "I'll stay," he rasped. I'll follow the rules." The words tasted like ash. Kelly's smile broadened into something grotesque. "Good boy," she said softly, but still loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. That phrase repeated in his mind like an accusation he couldn't answer. He was exhausted. He had tried so hard to do everything right. He had worn his best, but still simple, clothes. He had kept his voice low. He had swallowed every insult, every humiliation, because he had to. Because he couldn't afford to blow this deal. Because he couldn't afford to be the angry black man getting hauled off in cuffs. But somewhere along the line, he'd lost track of himself. He realized now that he wasn't sure there was anything left to lose. The stain on his shirt had dried into a dark, crusty smear. His bag still lay at his feet, its zipper half broken from Kelly's search, the contents shoved inside carelessly, his documents crumpled, socks and boxers wedged at odd angles. His ID lay forgotten in the tray, half covered by the unused napkin he had tried to mop himself with. The passenger across the aisle had gone back to pretending to read a magazine, but kept glancing over the top of it every few seconds, eyes flicking to Langston's stained shirt, then darting away. Others hadn't even bothered to hide their stares. Even now, with the lights dimmed for the dinner service, the cabin glowed with the low, judgmental light of 100 watchful eyes. He thought of his team. He thought of his mother, who had told him he'd have to be twice as good for half the credit. He thought of the contract waiting for his signature, the money that would pay his people keep their lights on. And he felt something cold and unfamiliar coil in his gut. He let out a slow breath. Then he reached into the pocket of his ruined bag and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, he hesitated. He had told himself he wouldn't fight, that it wasn't worth it, that he couldn't afford to. But he thought of Marlene at the gate. He thought of Kelly's voice, bright and cruel. "Good boy." He thought of the laughter when she threatened him with arrest. He thought of the young attendant's whispered apology. Management knows. They don't do anything. And he pressed the call button. The phone lit up, casting a pale glow on his exhausted face. It rang twice before the voice on the other end picked up. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He didn't have the energy. He just spoke, voice low, even calm in the way only true rage could be. "It's Langston Price," he said. The voice on the other end didn't interrupt. They knew better. He took another slow breath. His fingers were steady now. "Proceed," he said quietly. "Full audit." The line clicked once, the sound of someone taking notes. Then the voice answered in a clipped, professional tone. "Understood, sir. We'll get started immediately." He ended the call without another word. He didn't need to explain what had happened. They would know. They would see it all. He let the phone rest in his palm, the screen going dark as the weight of what he'd just done settled onto his shoulders. It wasn't relief he felt. It was inevitability. He had given them every chance. He had let them spit on him and wipe their feet on his pride. But this was the line. He felt the energy in the cabin shift before he saw her. Kelly was approaching again, her heels clicking, that smug satisfaction back on her face now that she had finished serving the other passengers. She had seen him on the phone. She smelled blood in the water. She stopped at his row, leaning in so close he could smell her perfume over the reek of reheated food and stale air. What was that? He hadn't changed. He wanted every executive he met that morning to see exactly what their airline had done to him. He hadn't even called a car yet. He just sat there, unmoving, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, letting the weight of the night press into him so he wouldn't forget it. Because he didn't want to forget. He wanted the memory to stay raw, to keep him angry, to keep him sharp. He scrolled through the screen of his phone absently, the call log open on the number he had dialed mid-flight. Proceed. Full audit. It was done now. It was in motion, unstoppable, and he felt no triumph in it, no satisfaction, only inevitability. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling, trying to keep his eyes open. But as the first hint of dawn broke against the high windows, his phone buzzed. It wasn't the call he was expecting, but it was close enough. He accepted it and lifted the phone to his ear. The voice on the other end was cool, professional, but he heard the urgency beneath it. "Mr. Price," the voice said carefully, "we've begun the review. Thought you should know, it's already hitting the news cycles." Langston rubbed at his eyes with the heel of his palm. "Already?" he asked. His voice cracked from hours without water. "Yes," the voice said. He heard the rattle of keyboard keys in the background, the hum of a busy office, of people scrambling. They're panicking. The airline stock price dropped 12% overnight after your legal team confirmed the investigation. Langston closed his eyes. He felt nothing, just tired. "Go on." "The CEO released a statement about an hour ago," the voice continued. "He called it a regrettable isolated incident and an unacceptable failure of training protocols. He's on live TV apologizing now, trying to control the narrative." Langston let out a dry, humorless laugh that scraped against his throat. "And Kelly," there was a pause, the sound of keys stopping. "Terminated," the voice said. "Effective immediately. They're feeding her to the wolves." They named her specifically in the press release. Langston didn't speak. He waited. The voice continued, lower now, like it wasn't sure if it should be telling him this part. "It gets worse for them. There are other complaints. Dozens, apparently. Most of them got buried before, settled quietly. HR covered them up. Your legal team is adding them to the suit. It's going public." Langston inhaled slowly. The airport was waking up around him, the echo of rolling suitcases, the tinny voice over the intercom calling last boarding for a red-eye flight to Chicago. He let the sounds wash over him. He remembered Kelly's smirk, her bored disdain as she forced him to unpack his underwear for strangers, her voice dripping sarcasm as she called security on him. He remembered Marlene at the gate, skipping over him with a practiced ease, then humiliating him by making him weigh his broken, cheap duffel in front of everyone. He remembered the other passengers filming, the laughter, the applause when they threatened to arrest him. All of it boiled in his gut like old, poisoned water. He realized his hand was shaking. He set the phone down in his lap. The voice on the other end continued quietly. "The board is meeting in a few hours. Damage control. Shareholders are furious. They lost a $6 billion contract overnight. Your company just made it official." Langston let out a long breath that felt like he'd been holding it for months. It didn't feel like victory, just survival. "Keep me updated," he said. He ended the call before the voice could answer. He sat there, watching the day get brighter. He knew the footage from the flight had leaked already. He'd seen it start popping up in messages from friends and employees within hours of landing. He hadn't watched it. He couldn't. He didn't want to see himself cowering, shaking, shrinking as they tore him apart for sport. But he knew others would see it. He knew they'd see exactly what the airline had done. He knew the world wouldn't be able to look away. He shifted in his seat, sore from the hours of tension. He finally stood, adjusting the straps of his ruined bag so it wouldn't split further, though it sagged anyway. He caught his reflection in the glass wall of the terminal. He looked every bit the man they tried to make him feel like, small, messy, out of place. But he also saw something else in his eyes, something cold, something determined. He turned away from the reflection and started walking toward the exit. Behind him, airport TVs flickered with breaking news banners. Airline issues public apology after viral video. They screamed in block letters. He didn't stop to read the scrolling details. He didn't need to. He knew what they said. That the CEO had offered a tearful apology on morning shows, his tie askew, his voice cracking as he said how sorry he was that this unfortunate incident had happened. That the airline had promised sweeping new diversity training. That they'd claimed it was an isolated failure. Even as former employees lined up to say no, it wasn't. That Kelly had been fired, her name attached to years of settled complaints suddenly being dredged into daylight, her social media accounts deactivated after they filled with furious strangers calling her a racist, a bully, a disgrace. Langston didn't care about her apology if she ever made one. He didn't care about the CEO's either. He just kept walking, his boots dragging a little on the linoleum, each step heavier than the last. He knew this wasn't over. Months passed like the slow turning of a stubborn wheel, grinding through news cycles, board meetings, legal filings, public statements, and private apologies that rang hollow even in the most carefully worded corporate press releases. The airline that had once dared to call itself a leader in hospitality bled money in court settlements, lost high-profile partners, and saw its leadership decimated by scandal. Executives who had stood behind podiums, smug and untouchable, were ousted one by one in panic board votes. Their stock price never fully recovered. Their reputation certainly didn't. Other companies that had quietly accepted their terms before began pulling out of deals, terrified of similar exposure. Shareholders sued. Former employees went to the press, sharing years of hushed complaints about discrimination that had been buried under HR jargon. The company tried to save face by announcing new policies, new training, a new commitment to equity, but no one seemed eager to believe them. And through it all, Langston watched without gloating. He didn't find joy in watching an empire crumble. He found justice. He found truth laid bare for the world to see. It wasn't enough, but it was something. He hadn't expected to see Kelly again. He assumed she had vanished like so many disgraced people do. Her name forever attached to one viral video, to lawsuits and settlement talks, to furious debates on cable news about cancel culture and accountability. He had tried not to think about her because every time he did, he felt the familiar boil of anger in his gut, the memory of her voice dripping with contempt as she forced him to show his ID again, as she spilled water on his shirt, as she threatened him with arrest while passengers clapped. He still felt the phantom sting of her sneer, her condescending good boy. But life had a way of surprising him. He was back in the city on business, meeting new partners in the wake of the airline fallout. His own company flush with the massive contracts that had shifted after the scandal. He walked the streets in the early evening, the city lights blinking to life overhead, people jostling past in puffy jackets, laughter spilling from bars and restaurants. He carried himself differently now, he knew it. Head higher, eyes sharper, unafraid of who saw him or what they thought. He had earned that right. He turned a corner near a small grocery store and stopped short. Across the street, Kelly was struggling with two overfilled paper bags, trying to balance them on her narrow hips as she opened the door of a battered community center whose sign read Neighborhood Resource Hub. The bags tumbled, apples bouncing onto the sidewalk. She swore softly, dropping to her knees to gather them. No uniform now, no makeup, hair tied back in a messy bun, clothes that had seen too many wash cycles. Langston didn't move at first. He just watched, hidden in the crowd, the cold nipping at his cheeks. He saw one of the center's volunteers, a lanky teenager in a worn coat, hurry out to help her, scooping up the bruised apples without complaint. Kelly smiled at the kid, genuine and tired. She muttered thanks, voice hoarse. They carried the bags inside together. Langston exhaled slowly. He didn't expect the sudden heaviness in his chest. He thought he'd feel triumph, vindication. He didn't. He felt something else, something closer to understanding. He crossed the street without deciding to. The door was propped open with a wedge, warm yellow light spilling onto the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the space was cramped, messy, alive with activity. Shelves lined with donated food, bins of clothes. A bulletin board plastered with flyers for job training workshops, housing support, free counseling. Kelly was talking to a woman with 2 small children, voice low and steady. She gestured to the racks of clothes. She bent to the kid's level, ruffling one's hair gently. She didn't see Langston at first. He waited. Finally, she straightened, turning with another bag in her arms, and their eyes met. The expression on her face froze. Her mouth fell open a fraction. He saw it all in that one glance. Recognition, regret, shame. She looked like she might drop the bag again. Her lips trembled. The room seemed to go quiet around them, even though it hadn't. Langston didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't want to humiliate her. He just nodded once, deliberate and slow. A gesture that said, "I see you." She swallowed hard. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. She nodded back, barely, but it was there. The bag trembled in her grip. Langston turned away first. He stepped back out into the cold night, pulling his coat tighter around himself. He walked away without looking back. He didn't need to. He didn't want to hurt her more. He thought of the long, hard road ahead for her, for the company that had protected her for so long, for everyone who had cheered while she tore him down. He didn't believe in easy redemption. He didn't think she was fixed just because she was stocking shelves and guiding families to the coat rack. But he believed in the possibility of change. That was enough. He thought of the people he employed, the team that had stood by him, the contracts that would keep them afloat for years. He thought of the next person who would sit in first class, who would refuse to move, who would know they had the right to be there. He hoped it would be easier for them. He hoped people would think twice before mocking them, filming them, clapping when they were threatened. He hoped Kelly would tell the story herself one day, warning others not to be like she was. He didn't need her to thank him. He didn't need her to beg forgiveness. He just needed her to change. As he walked down the sidewalk toward his hotel, the lights of the city glowing in pools on the wet pavement, Langston Price let himself breathe for the first time in what felt like months. He carried the memory of the flight with him, the stain that had never quite come out of his shirt, the ache that would never quite leave his heart. But he carried something else, too, a promise, a refusal. He would never be silent again. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. I'd love to hear what you think about this plot. Did the twist surprise you? What would you have done in Langston's shoes? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Also, let us know where you're watching or reading from. We love seeing our community from all over the world. Your support and feedback mean so much, and they help us keep telling these powerful, meaningful stories. Let's keep the conversation going.